Ukraine must win this war. Russia must lose it. This is in our national and European interest. These were the words of Friedrich Merz, Germany's new chancellor. But why did he say this? And why is he right? Let's delve into this in today's video. Whether Ukraine remains a fully independent state, whether parts of it become autonomous, or whether some regions are annexed by Russia, these outcomes are geopolitically uncomfortable for Germany. However, they aren't Germany's primary concern. The real issue lies in how these changes occur. Consider the peaceful split of Czechoslovakia into the Czech Republic and Slovakia, or Montenegro's separation from Serbia. Both transitions were smooth for Germany. Scotland nearly seceded from the UK, and while it would have been inconvenient, it would have been accepted. Even if Montenegro were to reunite with Serbia in the future, granting Serbia access to the Mediterranean, it wouldn't pose a significant problem. The key difference in all these scenarios is that the involved states independently decided to allow referendums. These votes occurred without coercion and were conducted fairly. In contrast, Russia seized Ukrainian territories at gunpoint. Why is this problematic? Beyond moral arguments and breached treaties, such as Russia's repeated recognition of Ukraine's territorial integrity and the Budapest Memorandum, where Ukraine relinquished its nuclear arsenal in exchange for security assurances, the core issue is the precedent it sets. A Russian victory in this war would send two dangerous messages to the world: that wars of conquest are once again a viable strategy, and that nuclear weapons can serve not only as deterrents, but also as tools of aggression. This marks a significant shift from the post-World War II order, where territorial changes through force were largely condemned. While exceptions exist, like Vietnam's invasion of Cambodia or China's control over Tibet, such actions have faced international criticism and haven't been widely accepted. Historically, conquests were often recognized. For instance, when Paraguay seized part of Bolivia in the Chaco War of 1932, the world acknowledged the new borders. Such acceptance made wars of conquest attractive, leading to cycles of revanchism and further conflicts. A notable example is the Franco-German rivalry over Alsace-Lorraine. France's initial annexation, Germany's subsequent reclamation, and the ensuing desire for revenge contributed to both world wars, resulting in millions of deaths. Today, the international community generally rejects territorial changes by force, reducing the appeal of conquests and promoting stability. Allowing Russia's aggression to succeed would undermine this principle, potentially triggering a cascade of similar actions worldwide. Since World War II, military conquest has become largely unacceptable. States can no longer just redraw borders through force, at least not without serious consequences. Yes, there have been exceptions, North Vietnam conquering South Vietnam or China's occupation of Tibet. But even in those cases, full international acceptance never came. The norm remains: conquest is condemned. That doesn't mean conquest is impossible, just costly. A state might take land, but it faces sanctions, diplomatic isolation, and a permanent threat of retaliation. Take Iraq's invasion of Kuwait under Saddam Hussein. After declaring it a province of Iraq, global powers demanded a withdrawal. When Saddam refused, a military coalition pushed Iraq back with overwhelming force. The regime was severely weakened, and Saddam's grip on power never fully recovered. In the end, he lost everything, including his life. So yes, a country can technically seize land. It might even extract some short-term value, resources, farmland, infrastructure, but it can't secure international rights like maritime zones or economic exclusivity. That means no recognition of territorial waters, no rights to offshore drilling, and no lasting legitimacy. It becomes a permanent liability, a source of political friction, not strength. This global system didn't evolve by accident. It was designed to make war less appealing, to reduce incentives for conquest, and it works. Compared to centuries past, wars have become rarer, less brutal, and less likely to escalate across entire regions. Before the international order we know today, conquest was a normal and widely accepted part of geopolitics. Nations throughout history would expand their borders by force, take what they wanted from neighboring states, and eventually receive international recognition for doing so. One powerful example is Friedrich the Great. His very first war was a surprise invasion of Austria to seize Silesia. After several battles and additional fighting, the territory remained under Prussian control, and over time, that conquest was internationally accepted. His reputation was built not in spite of conquest, but because of it. This pattern wasn't unique to Prussia. It was the rule throughout most of human history. The more successful your wars, the greater your nation became. Conquest was rewarded and often legitimized after the fact. But this also led to an endless cycle of war and revanchism, nations seeking revenge for territory lost in earlier conflicts. One of the clearest examples of this was the centuries-long rivalry between France and Germany, centered on the Alsace-Lorraine region. It began with King Louis XIV of France, who launched the so-called Reunion Wars in an effort to push France's borders to the Rhine River. He fabricated legal claims to justify military action and partially succeeded. Later, during the Revolutionary and Napoleonic eras, France expanded again and fully annexed the disputed regions. Then came the Franco-Prussian War, in which Germany defeated France and took Alsace-Lorraine for itself. France never accepted this loss. The desire to reclaim that land was a major factor leading to World War I. France emerged victorious from that war and regained the territory. But the loss and humiliation suffered by Germany then fed into the conditions that led to World War II. During that conflict, Nazi Germany once again annexed Alsace-Lorraine. Once more, generations of rivalry turned into war. This single territorial conflict, just one border, was responsible for millions of deaths across 2 world wars. And it's only one example. The point is clear. When conquest is accepted, it breeds instability, revenge, and endless war. That's exactly why the modern international order changed the rules after World War II. Conquests were no longer meant to be recognized or rewarded. Borders were supposed to become stable, fixed, and protected by international norms and institutions. While the world has not been entirely free from war since then, this new principle drastically reduced both the number and the intensity of conflicts. For the first time in history, the incentive to expand territory through violence was broadly removed. This system isn't perfect, but it has created more global stability than anything that came before it. It's one of the few tools we have to prevent cycles of revanchism and the kind of massive conflicts that plagued Europe for centuries. And while the rule doesn't always stop wars, it makes them less frequent, less rewarding, and more politically costly. That's why Russia's current war in Ukraine is so dangerous. If it ends in success for the aggressor, the consequences won't stop at Ukraine's borders. It would send a message to the entire world: conquest works again. If Russia can get away with taking territory by force and face no lasting consequences, perhaps even gain something from it, then that principle is broken. And the moment that message spreads, it will be heard far beyond Eastern Europe. Countries with territorial ambitions across the globe will take note. Venezuela, for example, recently declared that 2/3 of Guyana belong to them. So far, that's just a political claim. But if Russia sets a precedent, who's to say it won't turn military? Venezuela is significantly more powerful than Guyana. Without deterrence, nothing stops them from acting. And Venezuela is not alone. Across every continent, there are unresolved territorial disputes. If the post-World War I norm collapses, the world won't just see one war. It could see many, each justified by the same excuse. Russia did it and it worked. So why should Germany care, even if these wars happen far away? After all, Germany isn't being invaded. At first glance, it might seem like something that can be observed from a distance. But that's not how interconnected modern economies function. Germany doesn't just benefit from a peaceful world, it depends on it. Germany's prosperity is built on exports, trade routes, and global stability. Without safe shipping lanes, there's no secure access to resources, customers, or partners. The idea that distant wars are irrelevant collapses the moment one affects a supply chain. Take Taiwan as an example. It's over 10,000 kilometers away, and yet, if a war breaks out over Taiwan, Germany's economy would feel it immediately. Taiwan is a global leader in semiconductor production. If chip exports stop, entire sectors of German industry could grind to a halt. Car manufacturing, electronics, mechanical engineering, these are all dependent on high-performance microchips. And a war in East Asia wouldn't just disrupt Taiwan, it would destabilize trade with China, Japan, and South Korea. The ripple effect would be catastrophic. Supply chain breakdowns, mass layoffs, and a severe economic downturn in Germany. But this isn't just about Asia. The war in Ukraine has real consequences for Germany too, and not just negative ones. A Ukrainian victory would open new economic opportunities. Ukraine is an industrial country with strong agricultural output, natural resources, and energy potential. It has already discovered significant gas reserves, and crucially, it still possesses much of the Soviet-era pipeline infrastructure. That means, within a few years, Ukraine could become a major gas supplier to Europe without the need to build entirely new infrastructure. These reserves could be connected quickly and cheaply, and that would bring direct competition to Russian gas. The result? Lower gas prices across Europe, possibly even lower than what Germany paid before the war. For German industry, this would be a massive advantage. Lower energy costs mean more competitive production, lower inflation, and ultimately higher living standards. The economic impact of a Ukrainian victory would be felt directly and positively within Germany. There's also the issue of migration. If Russia wins the war, it won't just redraw Ukraine's borders. It will displace millions of people. A significant share of them would end up in the European Union and many in Germany. Estimates suggest that a Russian victory could trigger an additional wave of 1 to 3 million Ukrainian refugees. So even for those whose main concern is migration policy, the outcome of this war matters enormously. A Ukrainian victory would stabilize the country, reduce the refugee pressure, and strengthen Europe's southeastern border. A Russian victory would do the opposite: destabilization, economic collapse, and mass displacement. Now let's talk about Russia's internal situation. The country is facing a combination of economic stagnation and inflation, stagflation. Under normal circumstances, that would be devastating. But war offers the Kremlin a way out. It keeps the defense industry running, it keeps people employed either in factories or in the military, and it postpones the inevitable reckoning. Putin's regime is not built for peace. As long as the war continues, it maintains a degree of economic activity and national cohesion. But if the war ends, especially without victory, Russia faces economic collapse and domestic unrest. That's why the Kremlin has no interest in stopping. Even if it defeats Ukraine, it won't stop. It will regroup, rebuild, and prepare for the next target. Putin has said it himself. The collapse of the Soviet Union was the greatest geopolitical catastrophe of the 20th century. He sees Ukraine, Moldova, the Baltics, and potentially parts of Poland and Romania not as foreign nations, but as lost pieces of Russian influence. His goal is to restore that sphere of control. The frightening part, most of those countries are NATO members. If Russia moves against them, the alliance would be forced to respond. That includes Germany. And that means war on German soil is no longer unthinkable. It becomes a real possibility. The only thing that can prevent that future is a clear defeat for Russia now. Not a stalemate, not a compromise. A defeat that sends a message. Conquest by force no longer works. But there's another layer of danger, one that could shape global security for decades to come: the role of nuclear weapons. One of the main reasons Western nations hesitated to support Ukraine more decisively was fear of nuclear escalation. From the beginning, deliveries of tanks, fighter jets, and long-range missile systems were delayed, limited, or heavily restricted, and all of that was due to one factor: Russia's nuclear arsenal. Every major Western weapons delivery came with strings attached. HIMARS systems were provided, but with restrictions on range. Cruise missiles like Storm Shadow and Scalp had targeting limitations. ATACMS were handed over only much later and under strict conditions. The message was always the same: don't provoke Russia too much, or it might escalate to nuclear war. This caution has allowed Russia to wage an aggressive war under the protective umbrella of its nuclear capabilities. The threat doesn't need to be carried out, it just needs to exist, and that's enough to paralyze decision-making in Western capitals. But this leads to a catastrophic precedent. If nuclear weapons allow a state to invade its neighbor and keep the world at bay, then others will take notice. Countries that feel threatened, especially by nuclear powers, will no longer rely on international guarantees. They'll seek their own nuclear deterrent. And once that begins, the spiral accelerates. If one regional power starts a nuclear program, its rivals won't stand idly by. Imagine a nuclear arms race between Turkey, Saudi Arabia, Iran, and Egypt. If one of them develops a bomb, the rest will follow, and suddenly we face a world with far more nuclear states, far more hair-trigger tensions, and far greater risk of actual nuclear use. The more widespread nuclear weapons become, the more likely it is that someone, somewhere, will eventually use them. The more unstable regions possess them, the higher the risk of miscalculation, rogue actors, or preemptive strikes. Letting Russia win doesn't just break the rules of conventional war, it opens the door to a nuclearized world order, where conquest and deterrence become inseparable, and survival depends on having the biggest bomb. If Russia is allowed to win this war, it won't just be a military or political victory. It would be the unsealing of a Pandora's box. The world would regress to a state not unlike the 19th or early 20th century, full of shifting alliances, spheres of influence, territorial ambitions, and this time with nuclear weapons in the mix. What would follow is almost certain: more wars, more displacement, more economic instability, and more global insecurity. For Germany, that means more refugees, more disruptions to trade, greater military spending, fewer funds for social programs, higher taxes, and lower living standards. And the risk of being pulled into a military conflict, possibly even a nuclear one, would become very real. All of this is avoidable, but only if Russia loses. Friedrich Merz is right, not because Ukraine is a perfect democracy or a model nation, not because Germany must passionately care about Crimea, not even because treaties must always be honored or because we have a moral duty. He's right because letting Russia win would destroy the foundation of the world order that guarantees peace, trade, and stability, especially for export nations like Germany. He's also right because a world where borders can once again be changed by force is a world where war becomes the new normal. And he's right because a world where nuclear weapons protect invasions is a world where everyone will want them, and someone eventually will use them. That's why Ukraine must win, and why it's in Germany's own interest to ensure that it does. If you found this interesting, please leave a follow. Take care, and see you soon.